The courtroom went silent. The judge's eyes locked on me, and for a moment he froze, his gavel hung mid-air. No one in that room knew who I really was, until that moment. And when the truth came out, the lives of everyone in that courthouse would never be the same again. The moment I stepped into that courtroom, the air felt different, heavier somehow. People were already seated, lawyers shuffling papers, the murmurs of family members filling the background like a low hum. I kept my head down as I walked to my seat, clutching the strap of my old leather purse as if it were a lifeline. My heart was hammering so loudly I was sure someone would notice, but nobody paid much attention to me, at least, not yet. To them, I was just another spectator, another gray-haired woman in the back row. But I knew the second the judge looked up, everything would change. When he entered, the room rose as one, silence swallowing the whispers. The bailiff's voice rang out, commanding respect, but I barely heard it. My eyes went straight to him, to the man in the dark robe who carried more than authority. He carried pieces of my past. At first, he seemed composed, scanning the room like every other day, until his gaze fell on me. It lasted less than a heartbeat, but I saw it. His face stiffened, his lips parted, and for just a second, his hand froze before it struck the gavel. He knew me. Oh, he knew exactly who I was, though no one else in the room had a clue. I felt my stomach twist into knots as I sat down again, praying no one noticed the flicker of recognition between us. My son, seated at the defendant's table, didn't even glance my way. He was too busy whispering with his lawyer, his face pale, eyes restless. I studied him, the boy I had raised, the man he had become, now trapped in the storm of accusations and lies. And yet, none of them knew the truth, not even him. For months I had carried the weight of silence, and now, fate had dragged me into the one place where silence could no longer survive. The case was supposed to be simple, at least from the outside. Fraud, embezzlement, money moved where it shouldn't have gone, numbers on paper that told a story of betrayal and greed. But behind those numbers was something darker, something no one in this courtroom could begin to imagine. My son's lawyer began his opening statement, confident and calm, painting a picture of innocence, of a hard-working man caught up in misunderstandings. Across the room, the prosecution sat stiff and cold, their files stacked like weapons. I should have been listening, but my mind was miles away, back to the night everything had begun. I thought of the secrets I had buried so deep, secrets tied to the very man now sitting in judgment of my son. Memories flashed, shadows of late-night conversations, whispered promises, the kind of intimacy that could never be spoken aloud. My chest ached as I remembered, and I wondered if anyone else could see the tremor in my hands. For decades, I had lived with the knowledge that one day, truth would claw its way to the surface, and now, here it was, wrapped in silence, threatening to shatter the fragile balance of everything. The judge cleared his throat, his voice steady as he addressed the courtroom, but I noticed the tiny crack in it, the way his eyes avoided mine. He was trying to bury it, just like I had, but the past has a way of demanding its due. My son still hadn't noticed anything unusual, and I wondered how he would react if he knew what tied me to the man deciding his fate. Would he hate me? Would he understand? Or would it all be too much, another betrayal on top of the one that had already brought him here? I shifted in my seat, my palms damp. Around me, people whispered, took notes, nodded along to the arguments, unaware. Yet the real story wasn't in the files or the witnesses, it was sitting right here, in the tension between two people who had once shared more than the world could know. I wanted to stand up, to scream the truth, to free myself from this prison of silence, but I knew timing was everything. If I spoke too soon, no one would believe me. If I waited too long, the damage might be irreversible. For now I stayed still, letting the tide of the trial sweep forward, while every beat of my heart whispered the same words: he remembers, he knows, and he's afraid of me. The hours crawled by as testimonies began. Witnesses described spreadsheets, missing checks, shady transfers. My son sat stone-faced, nodding, frowning, occasionally whispering to his lawyer. I wondered if he knew how close he was to losing everything, not just his freedom but his dignity, his future. The prosecutor's voice droned on, listing figures that seemed to blur together, but then I caught something, a name, buried in a list of supposed business partners. My breath hitched. That name, it wasn't random. It was connected to the past, to nights when I had been someone else entirely. My heart pounded harder, and I glanced at the judge. He had heard it too. Our eyes met for a fleeting second, and the fear in his was unmistakable. I looked down quickly, my mind spinning. Could it be coincidence? Or was fate deliberately pulling the threads, unraveling everything I had tried so hard to protect? My throat tightened, and I had to force myself to breathe. The truth was coming, whether I wanted it or not. And when it did, this courtroom would no longer be about fraud or embezzlement. It would be about betrayal, hidden lives, and the devastating cost of secrets kept too long. As the session ended for the day, the judge banged his gavel, his voice echoing through the room. Everyone began to shuffle out, papers gathering, chairs scraping. I stayed seated for a moment longer, gathering my purse, steadying myself. I could feel his gaze on me, heavy and unrelenting, though he never once spoke my name. And then, just before I left, I heard it, the faintest whisper carried across the emptying room. Why now? It was his voice, soft and broken, meant only for me. I froze in place, every nerve in my body alight. He had spoken to me, acknowledged me, admitted without admitting. And in that instant, I knew this was only the beginning. The ride home that night felt like a blur. Streetlights flickered past the window, but I barely saw them. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The whisper of, "Why now?" echoing in my head like a ghost. He hadn't said my name, but he didn't have to. That single question held everything, our past, our choices, the fragile wall of silence we had both agreed to build decades ago. Why now? I didn't have an answer, not yet. All I knew was that the dam was cracking and soon, the flood would come. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the house looked cold and unwelcoming. It used to be my sanctuary, a place filled with laughter and warmth. Now it felt like just four walls holding in secrets too heavy to carry. I sat in the car for a long time before forcing myself out, my legs weak, my body drained. Inside, I made tea out of habit, though I barely touched it. My mind was too restless, replaying the day over and over. I thought of my son, sitting in that courtroom, unaware of the invisible storm swirling around him. He thought his trial was about money, about fraud. He had no idea it was also about me, about the history I had buried long before he was born, a history tied to the very man who now held his fate in his hands. The irony was almost cruel. How could I explain to him that his future depended not just on the evidence in that courtroom, but on a secret his mother had guarded for a lifetime? Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, memories assaulted me. The judge's face when he first saw me, his whispered question, the name mentioned during testimony that connected the present to our past. I tossed and turned until dawn, wondering how long I could hold out before the truth forced its way into the open. The next morning, I dressed carefully. A plain blouse, a dark skirt, nothing to draw attention. I wanted to blend into the background again, though deep down I knew that was no longer possible. People would start to notice. They always did when tension simmered beneath the surface. At the courthouse, I kept my eyes down, walking past reporters clustered near the steps. They weren't looking for me, they didn't know they should be. Not yet. Inside, the second day of testimony began. More witnesses, more paperwork, numbers, charts, endless words that blurred into static. I sat quietly, listening, though my mind was elsewhere. And then it happened again. A name slipped out during questioning, one I hadn't heard in decades. My chest tightened. This wasn't coincidence. Someone was pulling strings, dredging up connections long buried. My eyes darted to the judge. His expression was calm, unreadable, but his hand tightened slightly on the gavel. He had noticed too. The prosecution pressed forward, painting my son as greedy, careless, selfish. Each word pierced me like a blade. I wanted to stand up, to scream that it wasn't true, that he wasn't the monster they were making him out to be. But my throat stayed closed, my hands gripping the edge of the bench until my nails dug into the wood. My son glanced back once, just once, and for a brief moment our eyes met. I wanted to tell him I was here, that I was fighting for him, even if he didn't understand how. But before I could, he turned away again. At recess, I stepped into the hallway, my legs trembling. The crowd thinned as people went to grab coffee, make phone calls, stretch their legs. I stood alone near the window, trying to steady my breathing, when a voice came from behind me. Low, controlled, but familiar. Why? I shouldn't be here. I turned slowly, and there he was, the judge, though without his robe. just a man in a suit now. Up close, he looked older than I remembered. Lines etched his face, gray streaked his hair, but his eyes were the same, sharp, intense, carrying a weight only I could understand. "You recognized me," I said softly, more statement than question. "How could I not?" His tone was tight, almost bitter. "But this is dangerous, dangerous." The word sent a shiver down my spine. "For who?" I asked, though I already knew. "For both of us, for your son, for everything." He leaned closer, lowering his voice further. "If the truth comes out, it won't just destroy him, it'll destroy me too." My chest ached, torn between anger and sorrow. "And what about me?" I whispered. "Have you thought about what it's done to me all these years? Carrying it alone?" His eyes flickered, just for a second, with something like regret. But it vanished quickly. "You chose this," he said. "We both did." I swallowed hard, the bitterness rising in my throat. "We chose silence, not this." Before he could respond, the bailiff called everyone back. The moment was gone, swallowed by the machinery of the court. But I knew now that this wasn't just coincidence. Someone had dragged the past into the light, and whether we liked it or not, it was circling closer every minute. Back inside, the tension between us felt palpable, even if no one else could see it. I sat quietly in the gallery, but inside, I was a storm. Every detail of the testimony felt like a thread being tugged, unraveling a tapestry I had fought to keep intact. And then, as the day wore on, something else happened, something that froze the blood in my veins. The prosecution presented a document, a contract with signatures. My son's, of course. But beside it, another name, a name I knew all too well, one that connected everything: the past, the present, the lies, the money. The moment I saw it, my breath caught, and I felt my world tilt on its axis. The judge froze too, just for a fraction of a second, but I saw it. His hand tightened, his jaw clenched, his eyes flickered with panic. He knew what it meant, and so did I. This wasn't just my son's trial anymore. This was a reckoning. The courtroom felt colder after that moment, though I couldn't tell if it was the air conditioning or the dread spreading through me like ice. The document with that signature lay on the screen for everyone to see, yet only two people in the room truly understood its weight, the judge and me. To the jury, it was just another piece of evidence, another paper meant to build the prosecution's case. To me, it was a reminder of nights I had spent trying to forget, of decisions that had carved scars deep into my soul. My throat tightened as the lawyer's voice droned on, circling the details, pointing out figures, timelines, initials. But all I could see was that name. It had been years, no, decades, since I last spoke it aloud. I thought I had buried it so deep the world would never find it, and yet, here it was, projected on a courtroom wall, glowing like a ghost summoned from the grave. The judge's gavel struck, jolting me back to the present. "We will take a short recess." His voice carried no tremor, no crack, but I saw the faintest twitch in his jaw as he rose and disappeared into chambers. I didn't move at first. My legs felt heavy, almost nailed to the floor. People shuffled out, chatting quietly, but their words blurred into meaningless noise. Only when the bailiff gave me a pointed look did I finally force myself up and step into the hallway. The buzz of reporters and spectators filled the corridor, but I barely noticed them. My eyes darted toward the judge's chambers, the door closed tight, guarded by silence. I wanted to march up, knock, demand answers, but I couldn't. That would only draw attention, and attention was the last thing either of us could afford. Instead, I found myself pacing near the water fountain, my heart beat loud in my ears. Questions swirled in my mind. Who had dug this up? Why now? And most importantly, how long before someone connected the dots, before the jury, or worse, my son, realized what that signature truly meant? My son. I closed my eyes, pressing my hand to my chest. He was still sitting in that courtroom, still facing a fight for his freedom, and here I was, drowning in the shadows of my past. Guilt gnawed at me, sharp and relentless. I had promised myself long ago that my mistakes would never touch him, never taint his life. But promises, like glass, are fragile. One crack, and everything shatters. When proceedings resumed, the tension was palpable. The prosecution hammered at the document, trying to establish its authenticity, its connection to the fraudulent scheme. My son's lawyer objected, sparring with sharp words, but beneath the surface, I could feel the walls closing in. The judge sat straighter than before, his face carved from stone, but I could see the effort it cost him. Every time that name was mentioned, his hand twitched slightly, as though fighting the urge to stop the world from spinning forward. But he didn't. He couldn't. Hours dragged on. By the time the session ended for the day, I was exhausted, my body aching from the strain of holding myself together. Outside, dusk painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, but I barely noticed its beauty. All I could think about was survival, mine, my son's, and the man who had once been everything to me. As I stepped onto the courthouse steps, a voice called out, "Ma'am, excuse me, ma'am." I froze. A reporter hurried toward me, microphone in hand, cameraman trailing close behind. "Do you have any comment on today's testimony?" Panic surged in my chest. For a split second, I thought he knew. Thought the secret had already slipped, stepped free into the world. But his question was vague, general. He was fishing. Still, I couldn't risk it. "No comment," I said quickly, pulling my coat tighter around me. I pushed past them, my heels clicking against the stone steps. My car felt miles away, each step heavy with dread. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at old photo albums I hadn't touched in years. Faces smiled up at me, my son as a boy, missing teeth, grinning wide. Myself, younger, brighter, eyes full of dreams. And then, tucked at the back, a photo I should have thrown away long ago. Him, the man who now sat in judgment of my son. The man who had once whispered promises into my hair, who had once held my hand as if he would never let go. I traced the edges of the photo with trembling fingers. We had loved each other once, fiercely, recklessly, in a world that had no room for us. But love had turned to sacrifice, and sacrifice had turned to silence. That silence had cost me everything. And now here we were again, pulled back together not by love, but by fate's cruel hand. The next morning I arrived at court earlier than usual. I thought the quiet would help me gather myself, but instead, I found him there too, alone in the empty courtroom, standing by the judge's bench. For a moment, I considered leaving, pretending I hadn't seen him, but something stronger pulled me forward. He looked up when I entered, surprise flickering across his face before it hardened into restraint. "We can't be seen like this," he said sharply. "I don't care anymore," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "You owe me answers." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "What do you want me to say? That this was inevitable? That the past always finds a way to rise?" His eyes locked onto mine, heavy with something between anger and sorrow. "I tried to bury it too. For you, for us. But someone's dug it up, and now we're both standing on the edge of a cliff." My throat tightened. "And if we fall, then we take everything with us." The weight of his words pressed down on me, suffocating. For years I had carried my secret in silence. Now, it was no longer just mine to bear. It was a weapon, one that could either save my son or destroy us all. When the bailiff's footsteps echoed in the hall, we stepped apart, slipping back into our roles, judge and spectator, strangers in the eyes of the world. But I knew, and he knew, that the line between us had been crossed once more. The day's session began, and with every word spoken, every piece of evidence displayed, the noose tightened. My son's fate was being decided inch by inch, but so was mine. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The air in the courtroom was electric the next day, as if everyone could sense that something bigger than the trial itself was unfolding. The jury sat stiffly, pens poised, while the prosecution lined up their next set of witnesses. My son sat at the defense table, his shoulders squared but his eyes betraying exhaustion. He was fighting, but the fight was wearing him down. I wanted to reach across that gulf of space and time, put my hand on his shoulder, tell him it would be all right. But how could I? Nothing about this was all right. The lies we had woven, the silence we had maintained for decades were unraveling thread by thread, and he didn't even know he was entangled in them. The prosecution's voice cut through my thoughts like a knife. "We'd like to call our next witness." The door opened, and in walked a man I hadn't seen in years. My breath caught in my throat. He was older, heavier, his hair thinning, but there was no mistaking him. He had been part of the old world, the one I thought I'd escaped, the one I prayed my son would never know existed. I felt the blood drain from my face as he was sworn in. If he spoke freely, if he revealed even a fraction of what he knew, everything would come crashing down. Not just for me, not just for the judge, but for my son too. The questioning began innocently enough. Dates, transactions, the names of companies long dissolved, but with every answer, my stomach knotted tighter. I kept stealing glances at the judge. His face was impassive, but his eyes betrayed that same flicker of recognition. He knew this man too. When the witness mentioned a meeting that took place decades ago, my heart nearly stopped. He named the location, a small office tucked away in a city that neither of us had dared revisit. And then, casually, as if it meant nothing, he mentioned a woman who had been there. The courtroom seemed to tilt. That woman was me. My palms went slick with sweat. I gripped the edge of the bench, trying to keep my expression neutral, but inside, panic clawed at me. I prayed the jury dismiss the detail as irrelevant, that my son's lawyer would redirect, that the prosecution wouldn't pursue it further. But fate is rarely merciful. "Do you remember her name?" the prosecutor asked. The witness paused, brow furrowed as though reaching back into dusty corners of memory. He opened his mouth. "Objection!" My son's lawyer's voice rang out sharp and clear. "Relevance, Your Honor. The witness is straying into speculation." My heart hammered as all eyes turned to the judge. For one agonizing second I thought he would allow it, let my name spill into the record. But then his gavel struck. "Sustained," he said firmly. "The jury will disregard that line of questioning." Relief washed over me in a dizzying wave, but it was laced with dread. The judge hadn't just ruled on a legal point, he had saved me, and that kind of favor wouldn't go unnoticed. Already, a murmur rippled through the gallery, suspicion hanging heavy in the air. As the questioning continued, I sat frozen, every nerve on edge. My mind replayed the judge's words, his decisive tone, and beneath it, the silent message meant only for me. "Oh, you're not safe. Not anymore." When the court adjourned for lunch, I slipped into the hallway, desperate for air. Reporters swarmed the steps outside, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. "Do you know the witness personally?" one of them shouted. "Why did the judge seem so protective during testimony?" another demanded. I kept my head down, pushing through the crowd, my pulse racing. Their questions hit too close to the truth. If anyone dug deeper, if anyone connected the past to the present, my carefully constructed life would collapse. I didn't go home that afternoon. Instead, I sat in my car, staring at the courthouse walls, torn between fear and resolve. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to vanish before it was too late. But then I thought of my son, his tired eyes, his clenched fists, the way he still believed that justice might save him. I couldn't abandon him. Not now. Not when the past had come back to claim us both. When court resumed, the atmosphere was sharper, more brittle. The prosecution pressed harder, their questions circling closer to truths I couldn't let escape. My son's lawyer fought valiantly, parrying each thrust, but I could feel the tide turning. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take another second, the judge called for a brief sidebar. The attorneys gathered, hushed voices filling the space. I couldn't hear their words, but I saw the tension in the judge's jaw, the way his eyes flicked just once toward me. It wasn't just my secret on trial anymore. It was his too. When the jury was dismissed for the day, I lingered in the back, waiting until most of the room had emptied. My hands trembled as I clutched my purse, waiting for a chance to slip out unseen. But before I could, I heard his voice. "Stay." The judge stood near his chambers, his tone low but commanding. Our eyes met, and in that single glance, everything we'd buried roared back to life: love, regret, betrayal, and the one truth that tied us together more tightly than chains. I walked toward him, each step heavier than the last. He didn't move until I was close enough to hear his whisper. "If this comes out," he said, voice taut with dread, "it won't just ruin me, it will destroy you. And your son." I swallowed hard, my throat raw. "Then what do we do?" He closed his eyes briefly, as if searching for strength. "We pray no one asks the right question. And if they do, we pray the jury never believes the answer." His words chilled me to the bone, because prayer had never been enough before, and I knew it wouldn't be enough now. As I left the courtroom that evening, a single truth crystallized in my mind. I couldn't wait for fate to decide. If I wanted to protect my son, if I wanted to keep the past from devouring us all, I would have to act quietly. desperately. And maybe, just maybe, for the first time in decades, ruthlessly. The next morning, I woke up with the weight of an entire lifetime pressing down on me. I barely slept the night before, replaying every word, every glance, every unspoken message in that courtroom. The judge's warning echoed in my head: if this comes out, it will destroy you, me, and your son. Destroy. That was the word he used. Not hurt, not damage, destroy. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the cup of coffee cooling in front of me, untouched. For 70 years, I had lived with secrets. I had thought I'd learned to control them, to bury them so deep even I could pretend they didn't exist. But secrets have a way of clawing back up, and now they were scratching at the walls, ready to burst through. When I arrived at the courthouse, the air was different. The crowd outside was larger than usual, buzzing like a hive. Reporters pressed forward, cameras flashing, their questions sharper, more invasive. They weren't just here for my son's trial anymore. They were circling around something bigger, though they didn't quite know what it was. Inside, I tried to slip quietly into the gallery, but whispers followed me. It was impossible not to notice. People turned their heads, leaned into each other, murmuring. I caught fragments. She looks familiar, doesn't she? Wasn't her name mentioned yesterday? The judge. Did you see his face when she walked in? I kept my chin high, but my hands trembled as I folded them in my lap. The pressure was building, and I knew it was only a matter of time before someone made the connection that would undo us all. The trial began, and the prosecution wasted no time tightening their grip. Today, they focused on financial records, paper trails that crisscrossed decades. At first, it was the usual: bank statements, company filings, signatures. But then they pulled out a document I recognized immediately. My breath hitched. It was a contract from long ago, one I thought had been buried with the past. And there, clear as day, was my name. The prosecutor's finger tapped the page for the jury to see. Can you confirm, witness, that this signature belongs to the woman present in this courtroom today? The room spun. I wanted to leap to my feet, to deny it, to scream, but before I could even move, the defense lawyer shot up. Objection! Relevance, Your Honor. This document predates the case at hand by decades. The judge's face betrayed nothing, but his voice carried an edge only I could hear. Sustained. Move on. The prosecutor pressed his lips into a thin line, clearly frustrated, but complied. The document was set aside, but it wasn't erased. The damage was done. The jury had seen it. The gallery had seen it. And I felt the noose tighten. I couldn't stay seated any longer. At the first break, I rushed to the restroom, gripping the sink as I stared at my reflection. My face looked pale, haunted, older than ever. My chest heaved with shallow breaths. No. The thought burned through me like fire. They didn't know everything yet, but the threads were unraveling, and when enough threads pulled loose, the whole tapestry of lies would collapse. I closed my eyes, remembering the man I once was close to, the man now sitting on the bench in that black robe, wielding the power of the law while guarding a secret as dangerous as mine. Back then, we were young, reckless, caught up in things we should never have touched. We thought we were smarter than the world, untouchable. But youth is always arrogant, and mistakes made in arrogance have a way of outlasting the years. I pressed cold water to my face, steadied my breathing, and returned to the courtroom. But the tension had changed. It was no longer about guilt or innocence in the narrow scope of the trial. There was a new undercurrent: suspicion, recognition. A scent of scandal in the air, like blood in the water. The afternoon session made it worse. Another witness was called, a woman this time. She spoke confidently, describing deals, people, events from decades past. And then she said it. There was always this one woman. She didn't belong there, too refined, too careful. But she was always present at the meetings. Everyone knew she was connected to. Objection! The defense lawyer's voice cracked like a whip. Sustained! The judge snapped, his gavel striking the bench. But the damage was done again. Every pair of eyes turned toward me. I shrank into the bench, heat flooding my cheeks. It felt as if spotlights were trained on me, exposing every hidden scar, every buried memory. My son turned in his seat, looking at me with confusion, even suspicion. He didn't understand. How could he? He had lived his whole life thinking I was just his mother, loving, supportive, maybe too protective at times. He had no idea of the world I had once touched, the choices I had made to protect his. and before he was even born. For the first time I saw doubt flicker in his eyes. Doubt about me, that cut deeper than anything the prosecution could have said. When court adjourned, I lingered again, waiting for the crowd to thin. My son didn't approach me. He didn't even look at me as he was escorted out. That silence was worse than anger. It was the silence of distance. As I stood to leave, I felt a presence behind me. I turned, and there he was, the judge. His expression was tight, controlled, but his eyes told another story. "We're running out of time," he said under his breath. My throat tightened. "What are we supposed to do?" His jaw clenched. "We survive, like we always have. But this time, survival will cost more than either of us is ready to pay." His words sent a chill straight through me, because I already knew what he meant. If the truth came out, survival might demand not just silence, but sacrifice, and I had the sinking feeling that the sacrifice would be mine. That night, I sat alone in my living room with only the ticking of the old grandfather clock for company. I couldn't bring myself to turn on the television or even read. My mind kept circling back to the look in my son's eyes in court that afternoon, that flicker of doubt, that tiny fracture in his faith in me. I had built my entire life around him, sacrificed pieces of myself no one would ever know about, all to keep him safe, to give him a life untouched by the shadows of my past. And now those shadows were creeping into his world, poisoning the very bond I'd spent decades nurturing. The phone rang, sharp and jarring in the quiet. I nearly jumped out of my seat before fumbling for the receiver. "Mom?" His voice came through, clipped, tense. My heart dropped. "Robert," I whispered, "are you all right? I need to ask you something," he said. His tone wasn't angry, but it was cautious, like he was speaking to a stranger whose reaction he couldn't predict. "Anything," I said quickly. "You know you can ask me anything." There was a pause, and then, "Those papers today, the ones with your name on them, what were they?" I froze, gripping the phone until my knuckles turned white. I wanted to lie, to say it was a coincidence, a mistake, a forgery, but my son's voice held something that cut deeper than the threat of exposure. It held disappointment. "Robert," I began carefully, "there are things from my past, things you don't know about, things I kept hidden because they had nothing to do with you." He let out a bitter laugh. "Nothing to do with me? Mom, this is my trial. They dragged you into court. They showed your name. Do you have any idea how that makes me look?" My chest tightened. "I was trying to protect you. I always have." Another pause, heavier this time. "So it's true then. You were involved." Tears stung my eyes. Involved is not the right word. I was connected once, through people I thought I could trust. People who— "Stop," he cut me off. His voice was sharp now, laced with hurt. "Do you have any idea what it feels like, sitting there, watching the jury put the pieces together, and realizing my own mother is a part of this mess?" "I never wanted you to know," I whispered, the words trembling. "I thought I could keep you safe from it all." Silence. Then, in a voice so cold it made me shiver, he said, "Safe? You've just made me look guilty by association. Do you understand that?" I pressed my hand to my mouth, stifling a sob. I had prepared myself for anger, maybe even hatred. But this wounded detachment, it shattered me. When he finally spoke again, his words were quiet, deliberate. "Tomorrow, I need you to stay away from the courthouse." The floor seemed to drop beneath me. "What? Robert, I can't." "You can," he interrupted. "And you will. Every time they look at you, they see me. Every time they whisper about you, they condemn me. I can't have that. Not now." My throat closed up. "I can't leave you alone in there." "And you already have," he said flatly. The line went dead. I sat there in the silence, the phone slipping from my hand. The tears came fast, hot and uncontrollable. For decades I had poured my soul into raising that boy, shielding him, giving him everything, and with one sentence, he cut me out of his world. The next morning, I dressed in silence. I didn't put on my usual pearl earrings or my neat jacket. I couldn't face the courthouse, not after his words. Instead, I sat by the window, watching the city move on without me. I thought of my son, standing before the judge, and I wondered if he looked for me in the gallery, even though he told me to stay away. But the truth was gnawing at me. If I stayed silent, the prosecution would keep digging. If I spoke, I risked destroying not just my son's case but the fragile thread holding me and the judge together. By late afternoon, I couldn't bear it anymore. Against his wishes, I returned to the courthouse. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the shift in the room. Heads turned, whispers swirled. My son's face tightened when he saw me, disappointment etched into every line. But what happened next made all of that fade. The prosecutor stood, holding a stack of papers. His voice rang clear. Your Honor, we've uncovered new evidence that changes the scope of this trial. Evidence that not only involves the defendant, but also, he turned, his eyes locking on me, his mother. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. My son's head snapped toward me, his face pale, his eyes wide with betrayal. The judge's gavel pounded, his voice booming for order, but it was too late. The spotlight was on me now, and there would be no escaping it. The courtroom, once a place I thought belonged only to justice and truth, had turned into a theater of whispers, glances, and silent judgments. By the time I walked back into that chamber after days of restless nights, I felt like every pair of eyes already knew something about me, something that I hadn't yet confessed to the world. The judge avoided my gaze, the jury exchanged silent nods, and even my lawyer seemed uncertain. I knew the storm was about to break, and I was standing right in the center of it. The defense had called a final witness, someone they promised would reveal everything. My stomach sank when I saw who entered the room. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a professional brought in to testify. It was someone from my past, a figure I had fought hard to bury, a face that dragged behind it a trail of secrets too heavy to remain hidden. When he stood at the podium, the air in the courtroom shifted. He cleared his throat, glanced at me once, and then spoke. His voice cut like a knife through the silence. This person you see before you, he began, pointing at me, is not who you think she is. She has lived under another name, another story, another mask. Gasps spread through the audience. My heart raced. My fingers gripped the wooden table in front of me so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream, to object, to deny it all, but the truth was out there now. He had uncovered the identity I thought I had left behind forever. The judge, finally unable to conceal his emotions, leaned forward. Is this true? He asked me directly, his tone grave. His eyes, the same ones that had frozen the first time they met mine, now burned with a demand for truth. For a moment, I considered lying. For a moment, I thought about fabricating another version of myself, building yet another wall of defense. But I was tired. Tired of running. Tired of hiding. Tired of carrying the weight of a secret life. So I stood up. My knees wobbled, my hands shook, but my voice carried across the room with unexpected steadiness. Yes, I said. It's true. I am not who you all think I am, but let me explain why. The entire room leaned in. The truth, I realized, wasn't just about facts, it was about survival. Years ago, I had lived a life marked by betrayal, danger, and betrayal so deep it nearly destroyed me. I had been forced to change my name, to disappear from the very people who once called themselves my family. And in doing so, I built a new life, one I thought was safe. Until now, every word I spoke felt like tearing open a wound that had never fully healed. I told them about the betrayals, the threats, the moment I realized my only chance at survival was to vanish. I told them about the nights I lay awake, wondering if someone would discover me, if my past would crawl out of the shadows and pull me back. I told them about the pain of living a lie, even one that was necessary. The courtroom was silent, except for my voice. Even the witness who had revealed my truth seemed taken aback by the rawness of my confession. My lawyer tried to intervene, whispering for me to stop, but I pushed forward. I wanted it all out. I wanted no more shadows, no more hiding. When I finished, I sat down, my body trembling, my face wet with tears I hadn't realized had fallen. The judge sat in silence for what felt like an eternity. Then he finally spoke. What you have shared changes everything. The court will need to reassess not only your case, but the very foundation of the claims against you. The defense scrambled, their strategy shattered. The jury whispered among themselves, trying to piece together the fragments of the truth they had just heard. And the audience, well, they were left with wide eyes and stunned faces, realizing they had just witnessed a story far larger than a simple court case. For the first time in years, I felt both terrified and free. Terrified because my secret was no longer mine. Free because the burden was no longer mine to carry alone. I had spoken the truth in the very place that demanded it most. But freedom comes at a cost, and as I looked across the room, locking eyes with the person who had exposed me, I knew this was only the beginning. Because if the world knew who I really was, then the people I had been running from all these years would know too, and they wouldn't let me go so easily. The judge called for a recess, his face unreadable, his eyes still fixed on me as if trying to reconcile the person I was with the person I had just revealed myself to be. The crowd erupted in murmurs, reporters scribbling down every word, cameras flashing. My story was no longer mine, it belonged to everyone now. And as I walked out of that courtroom, escorted by guards and surrounded by whispers, I understood that the real trial hadn't even started yet. The hallway outside the courtroom buzzed like a hive of restless bees. Reporters pressed forward, microphones thrust into my face, their questions cutting over one another in a frenzy. Who are you really? Why did you hide your identity? Do you regret it? I kept my head low, my lawyer shielding me from the storm, but inside I knew there was no escaping the questions anymore. My story wasn't just mine now, it had become public property. That night, I sat in the quiet of my small apartment, the city lights flickering outside my window. My hands trembled as I held a worn photograph, one of the few remnants of my past I had kept hidden in a locked drawer. It was of me, years ago, standing beside the people I once trusted most, people who had destroyed me, people who would now know I was alive. The fear crept in like a shadow. Had I made a mistake? By confessing in court, had I not only shattered the case but also painted a target on my back once again? My phone buzzed relentlessly, unknown numbers, repo, orders, even strangers who had somehow pieced together fragments of my past. The secret I had carried for decades had unraveled in a matter of minutes, and now there was no turning back. When court resumed the following day, the atmosphere had changed completely. The jury no longer looked at me with suspicion but with curiosity, even sympathy. The defense tried to downplay my confession, twisting it to fit their narrative, but the cracks were clear. Their carefully built case had collapsed under the weight of the truth. The judge, however, remained unreadable. His face betrayed nothing, but every so often, his eyes met mine with an intensity I couldn't shake. He was more than a judge in that moment. He was a man who had been blindsided by my revelation, and I could sense he carried the burden of deciding how much of it mattered in the eyes of the law. My lawyer leaned close. "You've changed the tide," she whispered. "But we're not out of danger yet. The past has a way of fighting back." Her words haunted me. During closing arguments, the defense tried one final desperate tactic, painting me as unstable, unreliable, someone who had lived too many lies to be trusted. But when it was our turn, my lawyer stood tall and powerful. "What you heard in this courtroom," she said, "was not a lie. It was not manipulation. It was a human being, finally telling the truth after carrying it for far too long. The law demands honesty, and that is exactly what she has given you." Silence followed her words. For once, the courtroom seemed to breathe as one, the weight of truth pressing on everyone's shoulders. The jury deliberated for hours. Every tick of the clock sounded like a hammer against my chest. I paced, sat, stood, prayed, anything to make the waiting bearable, and then finally the doors opened. The foreperson stood, paper trembling in her hands. "We find," the pause stretched on to eternity, "in favor of the plaintiff." A wave of relief crashed over me. Tears streamed down my face before I even realized it. My lawyer squeezed my hand, the jury nodded solemnly, and for the first time in years, I felt the heavy chain of fear loosen just slightly around my chest. But even in victory, I couldn't shake the truth. The world now knew who I was. As I stepped out of the courthouse, cameras flashed wildly, reporters shouted, strangers reached for me. Yet beneath the noise, there was something else, an unexpected current of support. Some people cheered, some held signs with words of encouragement, others whispered, "You're brave." For so long I had hidden in the shadows, convinced the world would destroy me if it ever learned the truth. And yet, here I was, still standing. That night, as I closed the door to my home, I whispered to myself words I hadn't spoken in years. I am free. Free not because the danger had vanished, it hadn't. Free not because the past was gone, it never would be. I was free because for the first time, I wasn't pretending. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't running. The judge's frozen expression the first time he saw me now made sense. He had recognized something, perhaps not me, but the weight of the truth pressing against the walls of the courtroom. And when he saw me confess, he knew, as I did, that some stories are too powerful to stay buried. But freedom comes with responsibility. I had to rebuild my life, this time not behind a mask, but in the open. I had to face the ghosts of my past, not run from them. And most of all, I had to live with the knowledge that the world now saw me, not the false name, not the shadow of who I once was, but the raw, unvarnished truth. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Because in the end, the courtroom didn't just reveal who I really was to the world, it revealed it to me.